Good morning, everyone. My name is Heather Exner-Pro. I'm the Director of Natural Resources, Energy, and the Environment at the Macdonald-Laurier Institute. Thanks so much for joining us today to learn all about clean fuels and their role in an energy transition. As if you follow energy systems, as I have, you certainly heard the term electrify everything. But the more you learn about energy systems, the more you learn about the different roles that molecules play from electrons and how we're going to need some fuels for a variety of energy needs, kind of in perpetuity. So that raises the question, how do they play a role and how do we decarbonize fuels as we move forward with the energy transition? To help answer that question, I have an excellent all-star cast of experts here with us today. I have Louis-Philippe Guerriapi, who is the Director of Public and Government Affairs at Valero, based in Montreal. Louis-Philippe is very active in the energy and energy transition discussions in Canada and on the front lines of interaction with government, industry, and economic stakeholders. His approach to the energy discussion is and, not or, if the intent is really to reduce GHGs in transportation. We also have Fred Gatala, the Director of Carbon and Sustainability at Advanced Biofuels Canada. Fred is the Director for Carbon and Sustainability at ABFC, and it's a national industry association established to promote the production and use of advanced biofuels in Canada. Their members produce over 14 billion liters of installed annual production capacity worldwide. We also have Taylor Amato, who is the Senior Vice President at Azimuth Capital Management, usually in Calgary, today out in California. Taylor's a vice president at a private equity firm based out of Calgary in the San Francisco Bay Area. She's been with the firm for 3 years and co-leads Azimuth's low carbon fuels vertical, working closely with investments in hydrogen, ammonia, sustainable aviation fuels, carbon capture, and CO2 to X markets and technologies. And last, but certainly not least, is Mike Gladstone, who is the Director of External Affairs at Enbridge. Mike is the Director of External Affairs and Enterprise Public Policy, North America's leading energy infrastructure company with assets in 8 Canadian provinces, 1 territory, and 41 US states. I didn't know that, as well as 3 countries in Western Europe across 4 business units. I think you are the biggest energy company in Canada. So with these fantastic experts introduced, we'll get into our questions. We're going to start with just some brief introductions, their role in the clean fuels landscape. I'll ask some of my questions, and then we're happy to turn it over to the audience for some of your questions. So feel free to propose those in your chat or submit them online to MLI. So let's start with you, LP. Tell us how Valero is interested in clean fuels and what your role in that sector is.
Yes, gladly. Thanks, Heather, for having us on. Not often am I part of an all-star cast, so I'm happy to be here. So Valero is, yes, a leading refiner in North America, but we're also North America's largest producer of low CI biofuels. So we're heavily invested in biofuels. We have been for years. We're the largest producer of ethanol and also renewable diesel. As you mentioned earlier, where we're from, the question of energy transition is a question of and, not or. So there are some applications that can't be electrified and others that are challenging to do so or costly. If I take the example of our renewable diesel, we're right up there on the front lines to be able to reduce GHGs in transportation today, which, and then, emphasis on today because we're there and the product is high quality, same trucks, same fleets. So if we talk about transition and reducing GHGs, we're right there and happy to be there.
Spectacular. So I'll move on to Fred, who's similar, but a little bit upstream, I think, of Valero. How do you guys see the industry and the opportunities, Fred?
Thanks, Heather, and thanks to the Institute for having me and Advanced Biofuels Canada present with the All-Star cast. In our view, the energy transition will be policy-driven, and a large part of that transition will recognize where we are, which is there are a majority of internal combustion engines on the road now as we transition to different modes and different drivetrains. And so in order to succeed and combat emissions from one of the toughest to decarbonize sectors, which is transportation, we need to decarbonize the fuels and the vehicles that we're using now. And we also need to invest in the vehicles of the future, and we have to do that all together. So in that regard, for the low carbon fuels that are members of advanced biofuels, these are advanced biofuels and renewable synthetic fuels that decarbonize trucks, cars, planes, ships, trains, you name it, all very usable today. it's an industry that is expanding. We're expecting about 4.5 billion liters of additional clean fuel capacity that will help Canada move to meet its significant GHG targets and to reduce transport emissions. So really looking forward to the discussion.
Super. And of course, all of this will take some money too. So Taylor, you're involved on the finance side and you're looking to find those opportunities that are, profit making. How are you guys seeing the landscape?
For sure. Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. My name is Taylor, and as Heather said, I work for Azimuth Capital Management, which is a private equity firm based out of Calgary in the San Francisco Bay Area, where I am today. So Azimuth has been investing in energy for over 20 years. Its beginnings in traditional oil and gas, but has been investing in energy transition since 2008. And today we're raising our fifth fund targeting US $1 billion that is 100% focused on energy transition across three key verticals: low carbon fuels, resources to support electrification, and low carbon electricity production and storage. So I work primarily within our low carbon fuels vertical, so I might be hopelessly biased on this call today. But I assess opportunities such as hydrogen, ammonia, carbon capture, and sustainable aviation fuels. We definitely have doubled down on the potential for low carbon fuels at Azimuth. In fact, we have 3 hydrogen investments today, one including, if I can use colors, a blue hydrogen play in the US Gulf Coast for export of ammonia and other hydrogen carriers to Japan, another a municipal solid waste to hydrogen company based out of California, and then the third is Monolith, which you all may have heard of, the global leading clean hydrogen and carbon black player. From an investor perspective, I'm constantly looking for opportunities that can achieve decarbonization at scale, and therefore that's why low carbon fuels are such a significant portion of my work. Not only do they offer a scalable decarbonization solution, but there's also plenty of incentives that make them attractive from an economic perspective. And I do focus most of my work within the US, so I might be coming from more of a US perspective. I'm really excited about the potential of ammonia, of hydrogen, of sustainable aviation fuels, but I'll pause there for now and happy to dive into details on those fuels.
Perfect. All right. And Mike, Enbridge considers itself an energy company. You guys are experts at transporting molecules. Where do you guys see the molecules of the future being?
Yeah, good morning, everyone, and thanks for having me here today. Look forward to the discussion. Enbridge, absolutely, we cover much of the energy landscape, but primarily in the energy infrastructure space across North America, across Western Europe, and increasingly exporting North American energy from North American shores to the rest of the world. Today, we move 30% of the crude in North America. We touch 20% of the natural gas that's consumed here in North America. We service 3.9 million customers in our gas utility, which of course is growing to 7 million customers with our recent acquisitions in the United States. And we generate 5,300 megawatts of renewable wind and solar. So we are across the energy value chain. I think important to this discussion is our view on the future of hydrogen, our view on the future of renewable natural gas, which we are heavily investing in both of those as a future. And the reason is this. The reason is that at the end of the day, the energy transition, above anything else, at its core, the energy transition is a transition to more energy and not a transition away from energy. And the point there is that the gaseous systems that our gas systems feed today, natural gas, will continue to be relied on, both for electricity generation, but also for end use, whether it's in hard to abate industrial sectors, for home heating, and as I said, for electricity generation. And the best way, the most fiscally prudent approach is to then look at how do you reduce emissions in that gaseous system. RNG, hydrogen, both affordable, reliable drop-in fuels that can support the emissions reduction and affordability objectives of our customers. So look forward to the discussion.
I'm looking forward to hearing about all your favorite clean fuels and what you think the advantages and disadvantages of each are. But first, let's start off with, this question of let's electrify everything. We can't. So where, from your expert perspectives, are the areas, as you said, Fred, the hardest to switch over? Where do you guys see the role of fuels, of those molecules in the future? What are the areas that we just cannot electrify? or would be too expensive and prohibitive to do so. Fred, since you're on meeting, I'll pick on you and start with you.
Oh, I think I'm unmuted the whole time. No, you're welcome to pick on me. Um, so which ones will be, I think that it's very clear that the light duty fleet is likely to be first to electrify. I see a lot of EVs, very nice EVs being driven in Canada, and very lower cost EVs being driven in other parts of the world. So certainly where there is infrastructure, there will be electrification. How does that fit with clean liquid fuels? It's the approach is that anything that has not been electrified yet should have as many clean fuels as is feasible to have in that vehicle, so that during the transition, we're able to reduce emissions while we move to these different drivetrains. The hardest to electrify is generally understood to be aviation, given the physics of carrying batteries, the amount of time that plane fuselages and planes are in service. So switching to hydrogen and electric for anything beyond the very short haul will likely be challenging. And that's where clean fuels will have their biggest opportunity in the future. It's not necessarily that anyone has to disagree with the electrify everything rally cry. I agree with it. If things can be electrified and they can be done with very low carbon electricity, let's do it. However, we need to give ourselves the safety that while we're doing that, we're also not increasing transport emissions, and in fact we're decreasing them. And so one of the best ways to do that is in policy that simply has a carbon intensity approach and can have all of these different fuels participate.
I'm going to stick with you, LP, while we're on the transportation subject, because I think that's how you guys that's your biggest market for sure. Where are you guys seeing kind of the future of the industry? What parts do you think you'll always be competitive on the carbon intensity and the cost with electricity?
Well, we'll always be competitive in long haul heavy transportation. I would add not only that, but on the sheer energy potential of liquid fuels, it's hard to beat. So, in a context where the discussion truly is to reduce GHGs, and when you look at a product like renewable diesel and say this is more than a drop in, it can be all the way up to an alternate, and that provides just so many options when you're looking into operating long haul. You take a Class 8 truck that does 100,000 kilometers a year, for example. Your cost of reducing a ton of GHGs is more than half what it is to electrify a family vehicle. So the cost is attractive there. Again, as a comparison, I'm not saying don't do that, do this. I'm just saying, if I look at the potential and the attractiveness of cost, renewable diesel really is interesting. And, if you were to take a truck and drive from Halifax to Vancouver, well, you can do traditional diesel, renewable in part, renewable totally. You don't have to change your entire fleet and look at different parts and trucks and mechanics and facilities. So it truly is what I call it's a sexy option. It's, GHG reductions now with minimum investments. I think that's really attractive.
Awesome. Okay, and Mike, now let's move to some heating, I think, also. So those guys focus on transportation, and you, as you see, Enbridge also has now 7 million customers who rely on you for heating. And so how there's certain aspects of heating that be very difficult to electrify because of I think the aspects of peak load and then having cold winters and that. How are you guys seeing that longer term demand on the heating side?
Yeah, and I guess to first echo what I think I heard Fred and say is, this is not an anti-electrification message. I think we should be gung ho and moving with pace at electrifying what we can in a way that's affordable and reliable and makes sense. And yet, if I use Ontario as an example, where we're the gas utility. On the coldest days of the year, peak demand of our gas is 5 times the electricity load, 5 times, which means that if you're going to electrify all home heating in the province of Ontario, you need to 5 times the amount of electricity in the province of Ontario. And that's just to have enough electricity for that day, for that hour, for that moment. And that doesn't get you to electrifying industry that 5 times. It doesn't get you to electrifying transportation, et cetera. And so when you look at, it's not an or conversation. It is an and so we've got a hybrid heating pilot in this province that looks at how do we put in electric heat pumps that work with the gas system so that as demand increases, you've got a backup. And at the end of the day, natural gas, we might think of it as a transition fuel. We might think of it as a backup. It is a fundamental, foundational fuel. And so with that molecule, what's the best way to build that molecule? Our gas utility, Enbridge celebrates 75 years this year. Our gas utility goes back 175 years. And we started manufacturing gas. And so, what's old is new again. And I think there's huge opportunities, not just in Canada, but across North America, to focus at how do we build the molecules that we need and that we're going to be relying on for things like home heating and hard to abate sectors, for sure.
And 5 times on your coldest day in Ontario, and I know, our colleagues at CGA have said it loud and proud. It was 9 times in Alberta when we had 4 million people at minus 40. And if you're new to energy systems, if you're not an engineer or a chemist like me, the big difference is electrons you have to use immediately. You produce them and you have to use them. Whereas your molecules you can store and have them ready for that very cold day or that very increased demand. And it's hard, they play very different systems, when you look at it, and I know you guys do. So Taylor, how are you guys looking at this? Because again, you're looking at where are, the low-hanging fruit for making some money on this transition.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that we're looking at it a bit more discrete. So really we're focusing on those, if I can use the quotes, difficult to decarbonize sectors. So we talked about heavy industry, cement, steel, chemicals. We talked about transportation, trucking, marine, shipping, aviation. And I think that the question comes back to not necessarily can we electrify everything? I'm not an engineer. I don't want to discount some of the technology advancements. But should we? And our answer is no, we don't think that we should. And I think that a lot of the reasons why we've discussed today, but I will just highlight, Heather, what you started talking about too, is just the some of the facets of energy logistics. Moving energy very long distance or storing very large quantities of energy is much easier with higher energy density molecules rather than electrons. So thinking of building a transmission line from Africa into Europe, great idea, great in theory, but again, very expensive, very challenging. This could change with some storage advancements and what we're seeing, but in terms of the low-hanging fruits right now and what makes sense to invest in today, we're definitely leaning more towards the low-carbon fuels for all the reasons discussed this morning.
All right, now let's talk about clean fuel nerd talk, which is what is your favorite, clean fuel? And we can still have a soft spot in our heart for everything that natural gas does. But the ones I usually hear about, renewable natural gas, and maybe one of you, maybe Mike, can explain what that is. Hydrogen, where does it fit? What are its, what is its potential? What are the costs? What are the best producers of hydrogen? What color is your favorite color? I've also heard of compressed natural gas, and then of course the renewables, renewable diesel, renewable natural gas, and those biofuels. So tell me, what is your favorite clean fuel and why you think it has the most potential for growth in the market coming up? I don't know who wants to start. LP.
Well, thanks, Heather. You know what? I'll say my favorite, and not for reasons you'd expect maybe, is that of course it's renewable diesel because, well, it exists in quantity today, and we can start reducing GHGs right away. And I think that's interesting, knowing it'll play a part in a continuum of innovation and evolution. So I think that's really interesting as a product. And, when we talk about potential GHG reductions, we're looking at up to 80% reductions over traditional diesel. So if I were to put my vote out on a favorite, because it's affordable, it's available, and it's quite performing, I'd say that's mine.
So LP, how do you guys make renewable diesel? What's the feedstock?
So the feedstock is recycled recycled fat, animal fat. It's not pretty feedstock, but then again, is crude oil? Not really. But so we have 3 facilities that currently transform animal fats, used cooking oils, tallow into renewable diesel. And we have a 4th facility coming online soon that'll produce, with the same process, with a bit of variance, we'll be producing SAF. So we'll be a world-class producer of sustainable aviation fuel as well. So, we're refiners. We know how to transform this stuff, and we know how to distribute it and, do this in an environmentally as friendly as possible way. And, the name of the game here is to have consistent, safe operations and a high quality on-spec product that's adaptable to, many different markets. As you're aware, if you take Canada alone, I think there's, some of my colleagues can correct me, or someone, in the participating in the webinar listening in, I think there's something like 17 or 19 grades of fuel that we use in Canada. So depending on the season. So, just a great product to have on hand.
Great. Who's next? Who has a favorite fuel they want to tout?
I'll go next.
Sure.
That is a devilishly hard question that, of course, I'm going to kind of dance around a bit. So our association, Advanced Biofuels Canada, grew out of being the Western Canada Biodiesel Association, and we changed to be the Advanced Biofuels Association because there were simply so many different types of low carbon fuels being put into the market. We're so beyond biodiesel, yet biodiesel remains a very strong part of many low carbon fuel markets. So it is really nice that there are so many low carbon fuel options that work in engines today and also can supply vehicle drivetrains coming at us. But there's so many, so I can't pick a favorite, but they all have a specific use in certain areas where they are extremely effective. So renewable diesel, certainly, we are seeing the growth in renewable diesel in the US. In Canada, ABFC member Bria Renewable Fuels just started up their renewable diesel facility in Come By Chance, which is a major activity on the East Coast. Of course, Tidewater on the West Coast started up domestic RD production as well. And biodiesel is certainly usable in areas where reducing local air emissions is a key priority, and we're seeing a lot of innovative mixtures of biodiesel added with renewable diesel. For instance, in California, there's a 20% biodiesel, 80% renewable diesel blend that gets the really nice benefits of local air quality, particulate matter, criteria air contaminant emission reductions, with the ability to be a completely renewable product. So the fact that we've got, you look at California, the average renewable fuel content of diesel is 60% now. The fact that we're able to get that high really is testament to how renewable diesel is a drop-in fuel. It's completely miscible with diesel. And I'll just maybe end where LP started, which is SAF is clearly a growing sector. The fact that renewable diesel facilities are able to produce more SAF, the fact that Valero's JV with Darling Ingredients, the Diamond Green Diesel facility in Port Arthur, will be producing SAF that gives regulators in Canada, like in British Columbia, the ability to move jet fuel within the low carbon fuel standard and can see where that fuel will be coming from. So there's many different great fuels, but I'd say that my favorites are the ones that are being used immediately in reducing emissions right now, because climate change, a ton of GHG reduced immediately is worth more than a ton of GHG reduced 10 years down the line, just because of atmospheric science, and we've got to stop emitting it.
Perfect. All right, Taylor, I'll go to you next since you've been waiting patiently for some of the other questions.
I have 2, if I may. So my first one is ammonia and my second one is ethanol. And again, we're working quite closely with both of those. So from the ammonia perspective, obviously it is a globally traded commodity today. So we understand it is, which makes it a good hydrogen carrier, much more efficient than liquid hydrogen when it comes to transporting long distances. And because I work closely with some of our Japanese investors and strategic partners, there's a lot of relevancy for ammonia, especially in displacing coal as a fuel within their coal-fired power plants. So it allows them to still meet their energy security needs, but it does allow them to also achieve some of the energy transition objectives as well. And of course, when that ammonia is made from a low CI hydrogen, whether it's through natural gas with CCS or whether it's through electrolysis, there's some carbon intensity benefits there. I say ethanol. I've been looking a lot at the ethanol market within the US, understanding that there is a surplus of ethanol right now, and plants are only running at about 87% capacity. And recognizing that there could be some, what does the future of ethanol look like? What are blending mandates going to be? But also, will EVs kind of displace the need for ethanol? But to me, this does present a unique opportunity for aviation fuels. And I think that this is not a silver bullet. There are still challenges with ethanol. Sometimes, depending on the model that you're looking at, this carbon intensity can be equal to that of conventional jet fuel, really just depending on those induced land use changes and how that is impacted. But there's also some opportunities to decarbonize that ethanol. Capturing CO2 from an ethanol plant is relatively cheap and makes a lot of sense. And there could be additional usage and value on that captured CO2, being it's from a biogenic source. So we do think that there's some potential here. We see that within the recent IRS guidance as well on the 45Z tax credits as well, that it sounds like corn-based ethanol will be applicable. So I'm looking forward to seeing the future of ethanol. And I think that, even the EIA came out with a couple days ago saying that production will increase of ethanol. So those are mine.
Thanks, Taylor. All right, Mike, where is Enbridge, seeing the future? Where are you guys putting your money?
Well, the first, maybe the answer to all three of you is yes. I think we see the future, and quite literally all of the above and all of the examples. I love that, Taylor was just talking about ammonia export. We do see tremendous opportunities for Canada off the West Coast, off the East Coast, and of course out of the US Gulf Coast. At our Ingleside facility, it's a real opportunity for North America, alongside our LNG opportunity, to provide critical energy to our partners and allies around the world. But I guess I do have an answer for you, because it's just a personal answer. But before I go there, I maybe just take a step back and say I think. And I know, Heather, this is not where you were taking the question, but I think that there's a tendency among some governments and some policymakers to be constantly looking at the energy transition and climate action and the objectives of reducing emissions, and ask themselves, what's the answer at the end? What is that energy source, the energy source that we will use to solve all of our energy problems in the future? And then once we know that, well, then we'll just, make sure we invest it and build it, and all the rest will come from it. And I think, you referenced right at the offset, Heather, that this is an energy system, and systems by their nature can't rely on one source. They rely on all of them. And, you look at Quebec Hydro's, some of their announcements in the last few months, right? $185 billion in Quebec to meet their objectives. And the only way to get there is to figure out how to incent private capital to invest in the energy systems. And so what I think you've heard so far is that to incent private capital to invest in energy systems, we need to let them be entrepreneurs. We need to let them be innovators and to try some things out. And then, yes, some might fail, some will fail. Energy ideas fail all the time. And that's how we've built such robust energy systems across North America and much of the world. And yet I have to give a call out to RNG. Before I was in the energy business, I was in the waste business. I spent many years trying to convince folks in the energy business to get all in on RNG, and now that I'm at the energy business, we're trying to get the waste business to come all in on RNG. But we have 55 facilities we're developing today across Canada with partners, clearly with partners. because there's a huge opportunity to increase not just the work in RNG that captures those emissions today and puts them to use, but to blend them into the existing system. It is the low-hanging fruit of emissions reduction in our gaseous system, and so we need to be all in on there.
Okay, I love your answers. And to your point, Mike, I personally am an energy maximalist. So I like all the energy sources. Everyone should have as much energy as they want. I'm not in favor of degrowth at all. So I love your answers. But now I do want to get into harder things. We're amongst friends, so we can ask each other some hard questions. But none of these are cheaper today than a fossil fuel. And I think the other problem is that, everyone wants climate action, but no one wants to pay for it. And so finding a customer that's willing to pay for the hydrogen or the RNG or the biofuels will also be tricky. And then, Fred, you made the point, that's where policy needs to come in. So what are the things that keep you up at night? What are the big challenges to greater uptake? How much of it is cost? In which sectors does it really cost? And then maybe what are some of the hidden, maybe logistical or supply chain, costs or challenges that a normal person just wouldn't know about or think about? So maybe Taylor and then Mike will kind of reverse the order here so you guys can get your thoughts in first. Go ahead, Taylor.
For sure. So I think for us, obviously, when we make investments, we really need to de-risk the opportunity. And a lot of that comes with having secured offtake arrangements. And those are becoming hard to get at this point. A lot of them are contingent. And I'm going to use Japan as an example. Again, going back to the use of ammonia for co-firing with coal, the government of Japan has provided some support via contracts for differences scheme, where basically they'll subsidize the delta between the incumbent fuel, so the coal, and then the price of the clean fuel, the ammonia in this case. That includes a bit of an equity return as well as the production costs. But the guidance from the government, the actual budget guidance, came out to be much lower than a lot of the companies expected. So we anticipated all this demand coming online in Japan, and then the budget dropped and it turned out to be lower. So I think that the government needs to kind of realize that there is some dependency upon them to actually support some of these. But I also think it is a bit of a mindset shift too, Heather, like you said, the realization that if we are going to achieve net zero targets, that there has to be, nothing is free, and that we need to pay a little bit more for that. But I do think that the governments can do a better job in terms of supporting those differences. And that's what the private sector is going to need in order to actually go ahead and make FID on these opportunities.
I love to hear about the hard stories, to be honest. I love to hear about the road bumps and then, how are we going to solve these puzzles? So I appreciate that. Mike, how about you? It's difficult for someone, the big company like Enbridge transition. And at least, you're a big company, so you can try new things. But in the medium term, I'm sure there's some real challenges to scaling up. What are you guys seeing?
Yeah, and in fact, I think the biggest challenge is scale. It's not the scale issue isn't necessarily the ability to build projects at scale. It's the ability to make a dent in the overall energy system. But I want to go back first and just maybe level set a bit. I talked at the beginning that we view the energy transition is at its core a transition to more energy, not less. So the energy solutions we bring forward have to be about addition. They cannot be about subtraction. So how do we add more energy and more sustainable energy and more affordable energy into the mix? That I think at a base level, energy that our customers expect, whether they be residential, consumer, or consumer focused or industrial, what they all across all business units, they ask us. There's a few simple questions, and I think all as individuals we ask the same questions. The first is, can I access that energy? Secondly, can I rely on that energy? That if it's not there when I need it, who? Third is it affordable? That if it comes to my door and I can rely on it, but I can't afford it anyways, do the first two matter? And fourth, is it right for the planet? Is it right? Is it sustainable? And I think all four questions, while they come in order, you can't take one out of the mix and think you've solved it. So If you look at the obstacles in the way to building more, renewable natural gas, more hydrogen, more ammonia export, more biofuels, and you look at those 4 questions, affordability is absolutely one of them. But I do think it pales in comparison to the role of government policy. The government policy today is not an enabler, I don't believe. It is not an enabler of investment in energy solutions. It holds it back, and it holds it back because government policy is taking years and years and years to try to figure out every detail instead of figuring out how to unleash private capital to invest and test and try out some of these ideas. So I threw a few ideas out there to answer your question, Heather, but at the end of the day, where I landed is government policy is the biggest hindrance.
Well, we're a public policy think tank, Mike, so I'm not upset with that at all. And that'll be my next question that we'll get to and start to dig in on what would be the policy, that would help unleash that investment and bring down costs and find some solutions. But first I'll go to Fred and then LP to answer this question too.
So I agree with you, Heather. I am an energy maximalist, but we've got to say an energy service maximalist, right? Like we don't want to be blowing a bunch of energy so that we can heat inefficient homes. Like we want home heating, and that can be done with less energy because we want the service, not necessarily just to pour it all out, right? Because it's absolutely valuable. Okay, energy nerd, exergy point aside, I'd say that cost is something that is really useful to look at. We in the biofuels world, there's always been assertions and claims that these fuels are just so inordinately more expensive than their petroleum counterparts, and now it just simply isn't the case. We do a study that we contract a study that Navius Research does independently that is called Biofuels in Canada, and they look at the progress of the industry, how many renewable fuels are being used, what the GHG reductions are, and the costs are, et cetera. And so if you look at from 2010 to 2021, including renewables in the gasoline pool, renewables in the diesel pool, it's 0.1% increase in cost. And most of that is on the diesel side, and most of that is fuel taxes, because our fuels are taxed volumetrically, carbon taxes put in there. That's a big part of where that slight added cost comes from. But on the whole, ethanol is cheaper than gasoline, and biodiesel is marginally more expensive than diesel. Renewable diesel used to be a lot more expensive, and now you certainly see the price of renewable diesel falling. And we're going to get into this in the next question, like you just teed up. The role of policies is just so key in reducing the cost to the consumers, especially when you have stacked policies like we have with the BC Low Carbon Fuel Standard and the Federal Clean Fuel Regulation. So these decarbonization in transportation is not a bank breaker. It's probably some of the most efficient use of money. And so to get these facilities up and operating and competitive with other jurisdictions is a key part to making these fuels available. So the cost is not really too much of a detriment.
Thanks, Fred. Love to put that Navius report, if it's publicly available, in the chat or something like that, or you can send it to me afterwards and I'll post it on my Twitter feed. LP, what are you guys seeing at Valero? I mean, you are doing this at scale. You're a global leader in some of this. So, where are you seeing the costs are coming in? What are the other logistical challenges that you guys, that keeps you up at night, like I said?
Yeah, well, so many smart people have spoken before me. They kind of stole my thunder, so I'll put it as a compliment to what others have said. So the question of scale, of course, is it doesn't scare me from how much we can produce. That can be understood by feedstock, facility capacity, and what we can distribute. The question of scale that scares me is it's completely unknown by policymakers. So to make decisions on what will be fed to the market without understanding the total needs of that energy market, that's a scary thought, because it can generate irreversible changes in the market, and then it becomes really scary and complicated. So the other item that is a preoccupation to me is that we're talking about transitions so much that people are under the impression that it's occurring, and it's not. So once we're in that thrust of policy making and implementing some changes, once we get to the cost question, it really is it's a global effort to reduce GHGs, but that comes to a very personal cost to consumers and taxpayers, and that's a huge difference. For policymakers to decide the cost is okay, and for consumers or taxpayers to actually decide to spend it and accept it. There'll be a swing there sometime soon once this continued implementation occurs. And the third thing that that bothers me is, and this was mentioned before, is policy meddling in the market without a thorough understanding of what's feasible and what's out there. And then you just stifle innovation. So by eliminating some choices or options, or by picking winners beforehand, you're really killing innovation. And this is something we're confronted with as refiners and as biofuel producers. In the same sentence, policymakers will tell us we want to kill 40% of your business, all the while asking you to invest massively in all these options. In that same sentence, it boggles the mind. It's a bit surprising. So I'll end my comment with that.
I'm going to keep boggling minds. Now we're going to get into the fun policy aspect of this. So feel free to be as punchy as you want. But, I'm going to start from where LP left off, which is, in Canada's government, but I think we see it in particular states and the United States as well. On the one hand, you'll have an EV mandate, which, as LP said, is killing a large portion of your business, or a clean electricity rig. And on the other hand, they'll have the clean fuels standards and say, well, we need you to invest in alternative kinds of fuels, and where will that money come from, and how do you look at your business 10 or 20 years down the road? So I did want to ask, at the same time, you do want clean fuel regulations. I think if you're trying to promote these clean fuels and want to find a place for it in the market. So what is the people's perspectives here on the clean fuel regulations? What would you do to change it? And then just, then you can kind of go, within the whole landscape of what governments are doing the energy transition, what would you want them to do different? Where are the real pain points? And if they change things, they could really help with the innovation and the investment. Who wants to tag? I'm going to go to Taylor first. You know why? Because she might not have the biggest dog in this fight, so she can maybe speak her mind the clearest here.
Fair enough. So I'm a little bit less familiar with the clean fuel regulations, but if I kind of juxtapose that with the low carbon fuel standards within California, I think really what it comes down to, these programs are only helpful as their design allows them to be. And design impacts obviously have a large impact on the market. From an investment perspective, we have investments that do benefit from California's LCFS credits, but the challenge is that those credits have fallen quite a bit. So it does impact economics quite a bit, and looking at investment opportunities, it really erodes that IRR. And right now we see that prices have been falling of those credits just because there's been less, there's been just such an oversupply of renewable diesel, for example. So I think learnings from that program, and whether that is becoming more strict on CI reduction, that will hopefully uplift the price of credits. I think that's what Canada should look at in terms of how we can make this program even better and really start from the offset in terms of the design.
Thanks. Maybe I'll go to Fred now, who's probably has more optimism on some of these policy things, or has maybe a clearer view for your industry.
So when talking about the clean fuel regulations, it's useful to pause and say Canada just put in place a national low carbon fuel standard. I mean, that is such a significant policy that's been in place since the end of June 2022, and where the market is functioning. Low carbon fuels are being registered, CIs are being calculated and approved by Environment and Climate Change Canada. That was a 6-year development process to come out with a policy that is very it's very detailed. Anyone who's a market participant in the CFR will say it is extremely detailed, but the industry is learning it, and there's many key things that the CFR does, whether it's the land use and biodiversity criteria that ensures that only responsible low carbon fuels are able to generate credits, from Also, the credit and tracking system is a very usable interface, but probably the key killer app of the CFR is that it creates a nationwide credit market for low carbon fuels and for those to transact. And that has shown to be the key thing that pulls low carbon fuels into the market. And so when you have that, as I said in an earlier comment, when you have that nationwide system that recognizes provincial low carbon fuels used as well. So a liter of LP's renewable diesel used in BC can generate a BC LCFS credit and a federal CFR credit. That's a key detail, and that's hugely important. So Taylor made a very good point about the lower prices in California. I mean, certainly, I think that's what the California Air Resources Board is looking at in their upcoming rulemaking. The fact that the low carbon fuel standard policy approach has generated such emission reductions, and it's something that can really have the dial turned up on it, is probably a good way to address those lower credit values. And I think that's part of the reason why they're doing the rulemaking. I mean, California is looking at a 2040 signal to the market for decarbonizing. BC has 2030 in place with their new regulation that came in Jan 1, 2024. The federal CFR has 2030 also. So it's the LCFS and the CFR. All of these programs have growing pains. They're all complex to get up the curve on, but they're just a structure that can be strengthened, and you can force the market to do more GHG reductions. And part of the reason why traditional refiners are now leading producers of renewable fuels, like LP, you said in your opening remarks. So I guess to sum that up, more fuels under the policy program of the low carbon fuel standard is probably going to be one of the key things that drives further decarbonization.
Super. Okay, now we're going to get into the big boys, Valero and Enbridge. And I think it's fair to say, I doubt you disagree, that you guys, your companies are thriving despite the policy environment right now, that, you know, you're having to climb uphill and scrap, and you guys are doing well, but you could be doing so much better, if that policy environment was supportive. And so how are you seeing this in the clean fuels? What are the policies that would help you, do you think, achieve more decarbonization, achieve more investment, get further through this transition than what the government is allowing now? Mike, I'm going to start with you.
Yeah, for sure. And really appreciate the comments so far. I mean, I think most of really everything Enbridge does itself is outside of the clean fuel regs. So I'll put that as the first statement, but absolutely involved and impacted, and our customers and partners are impacted by all sorts of these policies. I think, Lisa Bainton once from CAP used a line which I love, which is the United States. Governments have choices when they try to tip the scales in public policy, and that is a government's job, by the way, to tip the scales. We just hope they always tip it as minimally as possible. But they have a choice of carrot or sticks. And the United States, as to use Lisa's line once, was, it's a buffet of carrots. And in Canada, it seems to be a battalion of batons, which, and it makes it incredibly hard to figure it out. And the other, kind of example I'd give is, we're still trying to, as an investor in Canada, as a Canadian company that invests our capital in Canada in energy projects, we sit back and we still try to figure out what is the policy environment. We're always told it's going to be coming, or it's, just wait, it's another year, or there's another consultation. We're almost done that one, but there's gonna be another policy that comes, and just wait till we figure that out. And then it's provincial and it's municipal, even in some cases. And so it is way too complicated. Like, we're trying to solve for a conclusion. And it seems to me as a Canadian policy set, we're ill prepared to just start the work and get the investment flowing. And so as an international company, Canadian company, we have choices where we invest our capital. And we're going to invest that capital where we have clarity on a return on that capital. And so when we look at our business unit set, we look at jurisdictions, too much of what's happening in Canada is a disincentive to invest in those, I think, critical energy projects here in Canada. And I think that's solvable.
Perfect. LP?
Wow. Yeah, where to start? Listen, we talk about the CFR, and we worked a lot on developing the CFR with various industry stakeholders and government. So, it goes back to 2016 or 2017, if I'm not mistaken. So a lot of effort and, diligent effort and presence in the development of that regulation. Is it perfect? By no means, but probably the only one or one of a very select few public policies that actually help reduce GHGs. So, the takeaway from that is it's imperfect policy that, actually drives some results. What I find unfortunate, though, is that, organizations like ours require regulatory certainty when we look at investing and innovating. And that's where it becomes a bit of a challenge. So, if you keep moving the goalposts and you're moving the target, it's hard for us to anticipate with some level of certainty or, alleviated or mitigated risk where all this needs to go. So, if we were talking about a future government, I'd say look at the CFR as something that actually stands on top of what we call the mosaic of regulations throughout every provincial jurisdiction, but look at it in tandem with economic development, because it's essentially an environment-driven policy that requires huge economic aspects and generates huge economic impacts. So both the RIAS and economic outlook of the CFR, I don't think were well thought through, and that's where companies can seem as wanting to slow the wagon down, but in essence, we're just saying let's have a more comprehensive view of the CFR and factor in, or mitigate economic impacts and cost to consumers. So I'd say a more holistic approach around the CFR would be very welcome.
Awesome. Okay, I'm going to go to some of the submitted audience questions. So thanks to those audience members. The one that struck me was talking about hybrid systems and what your thoughts are. And I think, sometimes we have a tendency to make the perfect the enemy of the good, but a hybrid system is a great way to get emissions reductions. Today, with our existing systems, you guys have highlighted the importance of that. What are your thoughts? Where are you seeing hybrid or blending? What are the potential for that? And is that the road that we're going to take is some kind of hybrid or blending and, incremental? Is that how you see the clean fuels kind of being integrated into the mainstream market?
You mean hybrid vehicles?
I
plug-in
think
hybrids or hybrids in general?
kind of hybrid, if I think of Enbridge, they're adding, they're blending, I think would be part of it. It's just the blending and how far that can go. In some cases, it can't go, to 100%. And then the hybrid, and then Mike mentioned, we all talk about heat pumps, but you can have the gas powered heat pump as anyway. So however it means to you, what does it mean to you? What does that look like for you? But you can go first, Fred, since it looks like you got something on the back of your mind to talk about.
Sure, thanks. I appreciate that. So the concept of a hybrid, what does that actually mean? Not just vehicles, but hybrids kind of means taking the best of different pieces and putting them together in a hybrid, so you get something that is maybe very adapted to the real world. Hybrids in policy, what's a good example of that? It would be a clean fuel type regulation that has minimum volume requirements for certain fuels and has CI, carbon intensity reduction requirements. That is such the case in, say, aviation fuel. Why would you put aviation fuel under a low carbon fuel standard when there are going to be cheaper sources of credits than putting SAF into aviation? Well, you have a hybrid approach like BC has done with their low carbon fuel standard, where you have a minimum volume requirement of SAF and a carbon intensity reduction requirement. That's a hybrid approach. The CFR does some of the same things with preserving the minimum volume requirements for renewables and gas and diesel at 5 and 2, and having a CI reduction requirement. So policy hybrids, very, very, very useful. On the vehicle side, hybrids, of course, you can have the benefit of clean fuels being used in that vehicle, and you can have the benefit of pure electric drive for a portion of it. I know I live on the West Coast in the mountains. That is certainly a very appealing option for many in our community who want to be able to do the things around town on pure electric, but also want to just go totally into the backcountry and be able to have that energy density and have that fuel storage capability and the ability to refuel quickly at a charging station that is in a remote region that you get through liquid fuels. So hybrids all the way, and certainly I think that would unlock a lot of lower carbon transportation if you had, a lot of plug-in hybrid options available, especially on the diesel side. That would be wonderful. But all in favor of hybrids and what they represent.
The flexibility. Mike, I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, I mean, I think Fred, you said it very well. I talked about hybrid heating earlier. We've got a pilot ongoing here in the province of Ontario to allow folks to move to more electric heat through heat pumps while still being backed up by the gas system. You mix that together with our work, as I mentioned, 55 or so RNG projects in development at some level of development we're working on across Canada to blend into that natural gas system. So when that hybrid house is using natural gas, you're bringing down the emissions of the gas they're using. And of course, our Markham facility, which is the first utility scale hydrogen blending pilot in North America. Utility scale, it's 3,600 homes blending up to, I think, 2% of hydrogen. And so this takes us back to the scale question. How do you get to a place where you've got all hydrogen or even all RNG or all hydrogen and RNG in the gas system? Hey, let's aim for it, but it's a long ways away. Blending allows us to make progress today in a way that's affordable, reliable, and accessible to the people who need it.
Perfect. I'll go over to you, Taylor, and then LP, I'll give you the last word.
I don't have much to add, so maybe I'll pass over to LP. I think I concur with what was said.
Great. LP?
Yeah, listen, concurring is the theme here. I think the notion, and I said it at the start. I don't want to say I told you so, but it seems like it's an and not or. It's the mix of all of this, what works in which jurisdiction, in which neck of the woods, and for what type of operation. So I think the hybridization or having a hybrid solutions that are not imposed, but that rather emerge from what works for different folks is really the best way to go.
Great. Okay. Well, we have one last, couple minutes left for the last lightning round. So I'm going to ask you guys, how clean are clean fuels? How clean can clean fuels be? Taylor, let's start with you. Your last word on this.
I think that's why I don't like talking about colors, even though I did mention blue hydrogen and ammonia before. So I eat my own lunch there. But I think it really comes down to carbon intensity and looking at, if it's on a well to gate basis, how can you actually decarbonize at an end-to-end and not just relying on the color scheme. So I think that's what's of most interest to us when we look at low carbon fuel opportunities, is understanding it from a life cycle basis. And it turns out that they can be actually quite low carbon. So when we do talk about low carbon, they are in fact.
Awesome. LP, I know you have thoughts on this then, on the how clean and how the carbon intensity in the spectrum.
Yeah, well, very quickly, numbers speak. So up to 80% reduction of CI with renewable diesel. Ethanol is on the way to have a similar type of performance once we go through the technicalities of carbon capture from fermentation. So, both products, high quality products, low CI is getting lower all the time. So I think that's an interesting discussion. So how clean are they? Pretty clean.
Fred?
It's all CI and it's all really math. So the average carbon intensity of biodiesel in the BC low carbon fuel standard was negative. The CI of renewable naphtha was negative. The CI of renewable diesel very, very low. So they can all be very clean. I just want to make a point on this, that anything that reduces emissions below the fossil baseline is worthwhile to pursue. It's not helpful if we say, well, we shouldn't do something that reduces emissions by 80% when we have something that is 10 years away that could be 100%. We should take any emission reductions that we can immediately and progress. So calling anything a dead-end pathway or anything that shouldn't be pursued because it isn't absolutely perfect is 101 in how we don't want to work, which is having the perfect be the enemy of the good. So carbon intensity is the metric that we've all agreed on, and you look at programs that use a CI approach and you can see how they all stack up. And the innovation is so key. You see some of these pathways just continuously reducing emissions through more efficient plant design, better feedstocks. It's certainly an industry that is continuing to provide emission reductions in the transport sector and should continue.
I love that, Fred. But last word to you, Mike. How clean are clean fuels? How clean can you get them?
Yeah, I'm going to quote LP and say I concur. Look, I mean, at the end of the day, and Fred, I thought what you were just saying is dead on. That you know, the goal here, at the end of the day, the objective is clean. We all get that, but the path to clean energy is cleaner energy. And so everything we can do to make progress a step along the pathway makes sense, especially if investors are prepared to invest in it, consumers can afford it, and it provides the reliable and accessible energy that our economy needs, then hey, we should be all in.
Great. Well, I appreciate your pragmatism and you know the work that all of your companies and all of you are doing professionally to get us further down the path. And thanks so much for sharing your expertise today. Thanks to the audience for listening. This will be available on our YouTube channel, so you can share it from there also. Have a great afternoon, everybody.